The cantina on Nexus Prime was dark and smoky. Strange beings from across the galaxy sat at metal tables, drinking and talking in low voices. In the back corner, away from the crowd, sat two figures that looked like tall, thin humans but with gray skin and 4 arms. Zethkar stared at his drink. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the glass. Across from him, Velith set up a small recording device on the table. The young journalist had been asking for this interview for months. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Velith asked. His voice was soft and careful. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." Zethkar looked up. His large black eyes seemed tired and old, even though he was only 42 years old in hegemony years. The war had ended 20 years ago, but he still looked like he was fighting it every day. "Someone needs to know," Zethkar said quietly. "Someone needs to understand what really happened down there." Velith pressed a button on the recording device. A small blue light came on. "Tell me about the beginning. When did you first encounter humans?" Zethkar took a long drink. He closed his eyes for a moment, then began to speak. "I was part of the advanced scout unit. We called ourselves the best soldiers in the hegemony fleet. We had fought in 12 different star systems. We had conquered races that had technology we could barely understand. But Earth was supposed to be easy." He paused and looked around the cantina. Nobody was paying attention to them. The humans had just learned to leave their planet. They had simple rockets and basic weapons. Our leaders told us it would take maybe a week to take control of their world. We laughed about it. Some of the soldiers made bets about how fast we could finish the job. Velith leaned forward. "What changed your mind?" "The first patrol," Zethkar said. His voice got quieter. "We landed our scout ship in what the humans called Colorado. Big mountains, lots of trees. Perfect place to set up a base without being seen. Or so we thought." Zethkar's 4 hands moved restlessly on the table. He seemed to be seeing something that wasn't there. "My unit had 20 soldiers, all trained killers. We had plasma rifles, energy shields, and armor that could stop anything the humans had. We were supposed to scout their military bases and report back to the main fleet." "What happened?" Velith asked. "We met Jake Morrison." The way Zethkar said the name made Velith shiver. It sounded like he was talking about a monster from a children's story. Morrison was a human soldier. A sergeant, they called him. He had 5 other humans with him. 6 humans total. They had metal weapons that fired small pieces of metal. Old technology. Primitive. We should have killed them all in the first few seconds. Zethkar finished his drink and asked for another. The bartender, a creature with too many eyes, brought it over without saying anything. Morrison's group found us on the 2nd day. We were setting up equipment near a mountain pass. Our sensors should have detected them from miles away. But they didn't. The humans came out of nowhere. "How?" Velith asked. "They moved like ghosts. They knew every rock, every tree, every shadow in those mountains. They had covered themselves in mud and plants. Our heat sensors couldn't see them. Our motion detectors couldn't track them. It was like they had become part of the mountain itself." Zethkar's voice got even quieter. Velith had to lean closer to hear him. "The first shot came from above us. One of my soldiers just fell over. Dead. We couldn't even see where the shot came from. Then more shots. From different directions. The humans had surrounded us without making a sound." "How did you escape?" "I didn't escape. None of us did." Velith looked confused. "But you're here." "Morrison let me live," Zethkar said. "On purpose. He wanted me to go back and tell the others what happened." Zethkar took another drink. His hands were shaking more now. "The battle lasted maybe 10 minutes. Morrison and his humans picked us apart. They moved from position to position, like water flowing around rocks. Every time we tried to aim at one of them, they were already somewhere else." "But you had better weapons," Velith said. "Yes, we had better weapons. But they had something we didn't understand. They fought like they knew every move we were going to make before we made it. Like they had been preparing for this fight their whole lives." Zethkar looked directly at Velith. "When it was over, 19 of my soldiers were dead. I was lying on the ground with a broken leg and burns from their primitive weapons. Morrison walked up to me. He could have killed me easily. Instead, he knelt down next to me. What did he say? He said, 'I'd tell your friends that this is our world. Tell them what happens to anyone who tries to take it.' Then he did something I still don't understand. He gave me medical supplies. Human medical supplies. They weren't compatible with our biology, but it was enough to keep me alive until our rescue ship found me." Velith stared at the recording device. The blue light was still blinking. That was your first hint that the invasion wasn't going to be easy. Sethkar laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. That was when I realized we weren't fighting primitives. We were fighting something much worse. We were fighting a species that had been preparing for war since the day they learned to use tools. How do you know that? Because Morrison knew exactly how to kill us. He knew where our armor was weakest. He knew how our weapons worked. He knew our tactics. The humans had been studying us somehow. Maybe they had been studying warfare itself. Sethkar stood up slowly. He looked older than when he had sat down. The main invasion fleet arrived 3 days later, 50,000 of our best soldiers. The commanders were still confident. They thought Morrison's group was just lucky. They thought the rest of the humans would be easier to defeat. He put some coins on the table and started to walk away. "Wait," Velith called. "Where are you going?" "I have more questions." Sethkar stopped and turned around. "Come back tomorrow. I'll tell you about New Denver, about what happened when we tried to take our first human city." As he walked away, Velith heard him mutter something under his breath. It sounded like we should have left them alone. The young journalist sat alone in the dark cantina, staring at the recording device. The blue light was still blinking. He had a feeling that tomorrow's story was going to be much worse than today's. Velith arrived at the cantina early the next day. He found Sethkar sitting in the same corner, staring at an empty glass. The alien veteran looked like he hadn't slept at all. "You came back," Sethkar said without looking up. "You said you would tell me about New Denver," Velith replied, setting up his recording device again. Sethkar nodded slowly. "New Denver. That's where we learned that Morrison wasn't just lucky. That's where we learned what humans really are." The recording device blinked to life. Sethkar began his story. "The main fleet arrived 3 days after Morrison killed my unit. Commander Thakkaran was in charge of the ground forces. He was a good soldier, had conquered 6 different worlds. He looked at the reports from my encounter and laughed. He didn't believe you? He thought Morrison was a special forces unit. Something unusual. He said the regular human population would be much easier to control. New Denver was supposed to prove that." Sethkar ordered another drink. The bartender brought it quickly and walked away without making eye contact. New Denver was a small human city, maybe 50,000 people. It had some factories and farms. Nothing special. No military bases. No important technology. Thakkaran chose it because it looked helpless. What was the plan? Simple. Land outside the city with 1,000 soldiers. March in, take control. Show the humans that resistance was useless. Then move on to bigger cities. Sethkar took a sip of his drink. His hands were steadier today, but his voice was just as quiet. We landed at dawn. The city looked empty. No movement in the streets. No vehicles, no people. Thakkaran thought the humans had run away during the night. Had they? No, they were waiting. Sethkar closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Velith could see fear in them. The woman in charge was named Lisa Brooks. She was a captain in their local military. I found out later that she had been a teacher before the war. She taught human children about history and warfare. A teacher became a military commander. That's what humans do. When they need to fight, everyone becomes a soldier. Brooks had turned her entire city into a trap. Sethkar stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the stars for a few moments before continuing. We marched into the city in standard formation. 3 columns spread out to cover all the main streets. Our armor was shining in the morning sun. Our weapons were charged and ready. We felt powerful. What happened? Nothing at first. We walked for 20 minutes through empty streets, past empty houses, past empty shops. Thakkaran was getting confident. He started talking about how easy this was going to be. Sethkar came back to the table and sat down heavily. Then the first explosion happened. Explosion? Under the lead column. Brooks and her people had put bombs under the street. Crude explosives made from farming chemicals and metal pieces. When they went off, 15 of our soldiers died instantly. Velith's eyes widened. That was just the beginning? That was the signal for everything else to start. The humans had turned every building into a fortress. They had weapons in every window, on every roof, behind every wall, but we couldn't see them. Sethkar's voice got faster, like he was trying to get through the story quickly. They didn't use their weapons right away. They waited until we were confused and scared from the explosions. Then they started shooting. Not at random. They aimed for our weak spots. The joints in our armor. The power packs on our weapons. They knew exactly where to hit us. How could they know that? Morrison. He had studied our equipment when he killed my unit. He had shared that information with other humans. They had 3 days to prepare for us. Zethkar finished his drink in one gulp. The worst part wasn't the shooting. It was the way they moved. We would shoot at a window and hit nothing. The human would already be gone, moving to a different position. They used tunnels under the buildings. They used ropes between rooftops. They moved like water again. How long did the battle last? 6 hours. 6 hours of being hunted through a city that was trying to kill us. Every door was booby-trapped. Every alley was a dead end. Every corner had someone waiting to shoot us. Zethkar's voice got very quiet again. Thakkaran tried everything. He called for air support, but the humans had put up jammers that blocked our communications. He tried to retreat, but they had destroyed our vehicles with more hidden explosives. He tried to take hostages, but there were no civilians left in the city. Where had the civilians gone? Underground. Brooks had moved them all into tunnels and basements. Safe places where our weapons couldn't reach them. She had thought of everything. Velith leaned forward. What happened to Commander Thakkaran? Brooks killed him herself. She came out of a building right in front of him. No fear, no hesitation. She shot him 3 times with one of their metal weapons. Then she looked at the rest of us and smiled. Smiled. That's when I understood something terrible. Brooks wasn't just fighting us. She was enjoying it. She had turned war into a game and she was winning. Zethkar stood up again. He seemed restless, like he couldn't sit still when he talked about these memories. We lost 600 soldiers that day. Brooks lost maybe 30 humans. But that wasn't the worst part. What was worse? She let 400 of us live. On purpose. She could have killed us all, but she didn't. Just like Morrison, she wanted survivors.
She wanted us to go back and tell the fleet what happened. Why?
Fear. Brooks understood that killing all of us would just make the fleet send more soldiers. But letting some of us live, letting us tell stories about what happened, that would make the fleet afraid. That would make them think twice about attacking other human cities. Zethkar walked back to the table and put his hands on it. All 4 arms were shaking now. Before we left, Brooks gave us a message for our commanders. She said every human city will be like this one. Every human town will be a trap. Every human village will be a grave for your soldiers. Leave now, or we will teach you what real war looks like. Did the fleet commanders listen? Zethkar laughed that same unhappy laugh from the day before. They thought Brooks was bluffing. They thought New Denver was special. They decided to attack a bigger target, something that would really hurt the humans. What did they choose? Luna Base, the human military station on their moon. The fleet commanders thought that if we could take their space facilities, the humans would have to surrender. Zethkar started walking toward the door. Come back tomorrow, he said. I'll tell you about Colonel Ray Parker and what happened when we tried to take Luna Base. As he reached the door, he stopped and looked back at Velith. Brooks was right about one thing. The humans did teach us what real war looked like. I just wish we had been smart enough to listen. Velith sat alone again, staring at the recording device. He was beginning to understand why Zethkar looked so tired and old. These weren't just war stories. They were horror stories, and there were still 3 more days to go. The 3rd day found Zethkar waiting for Velith at their usual table. This time he had 2 drinks sitting in front of him. He pushed one toward the young journalist as he sat down. You look like you need it, Zethkar said. Velith realized he was right. The stories from the past 2 days had been keeping him awake at night. He took a sip of the strange alien alcohol. It burned his throat, but it helped calm his nerves. Luna Base, Velith said, turning on the recording device. Luna Base. Zethkar agreed. The human military station on their moon. The fleet commanders thought it would be easier than fighting on Earth. No civilians to hide behind. No forests or mountains to use for cover. Just a military base in the middle of empty space. That sounds logical. It was logical. That was the problem. We were still thinking like normal soldiers fighting a normal war. The humans had stopped being normal the moment we arrived in their system. Zethkar took a long drink before continuing. I was part of the assault force this time. After New Denver, they needed experienced soldiers who had actually fought humans before. 3,000 of our best troops in fast attack ships. What was the plan? Surround the base. Cut off their supply lines from Earth. Force them to surrender or starve. If they refused, we would attack in waves until we captured the command center. Zethkar stared at his drink. The base looked small from space. Maybe 500 humans total. We had 6 times more soldiers. Better weapons. Better armor, better ships. It should have been easy. But it wasn't. The human commander was Ray Parker, a colonel. He had been a soldier for 20 years before we arrived. But more than that, he understood something about war that we didn't. What was that? That sometimes losing is the same as winning. Velith looked confused. Zethkar tried to explain. We surrounded Luna Base and demanded their surrender. Parker sent back a message. Just 2 words, come and take it. Then he did something we didn't expect. He opened all the base's communications channels. He wanted everyone on Earth to watch what happened next. Why would he do that? Because he knew he was going to die. He knew all his soldiers were going to die. But he wanted to choose how they died. He wanted to make their deaths mean something. Zethkar stood up and walked to the window again. Velith was starting to recognize this as a sign that the story was about to get worse. We attacked the outer defenses first. Standard procedure. Take the small outposts, then move toward the main base. The humans fought hard, but they were outnumbered. We pushed them back section by section. That sounds like progress. It was exactly what Parker wanted us to do. Every position we took, every tunnel we captured, every room we cleared, Parker's people left us presents. Presents, bombs, hidden in the walls, under the floors, in the ceiling. Time to go off after we had moved through. Parker wasn't trying to stop us from taking the base. He was trying to make sure that when we did take it, it would cost us everything. Zethkar came back to the table and sat down heavily. The fighting lasted for 3 days. We lost 100 soldiers taking the outer defenses, 200 more taking the living quarters, 300 taking the equipment bays. Every step forward cost us more lives. What about the humans? They fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they didn't. Parker had made it clear to everyone that there would be no surrender. No retreat. No prisoners. They were going to fight until the last person was dead. Zethkar's voice got quieter. I saw a human soldier continue fighting with a broken arm and 3 bullet wounds. I saw another one use a damaged weapon as a club when it stopped working. They didn't fight like they wanted to win. They fought like they wanted to make us pay for every inch of their base. How did you finally reach the command center? By the time we got there, we had lost over 1,000 soldiers. Half our assault force. The command center was at the heart of the base, protected by thick walls and heavy doors. Parker and maybe 50 humans were inside. Zethkar finished his drink and asked for another. The bartender brought it quickly, then moved away to serve other customers. We surrounded the command center and called for Parker to surrender. He answered on an open channel so everyone could hear. He said, "We're Americans. We don't surrender to anyone." Then he laughed. He laughed? Like he had just heard a funny joke. Then he said something that I still don't understand. He said, "Remember the Alamo?" I found out later that was a reference to an old human battle. A battle where everyone died rather than give up. Velith leaned forward. What happened next? We blasted through the doors and rushed inside. Parker and his people were waiting for us. They had built barricades out of furniture and equipment. They had weapons pointed at every entrance. And they were all wearing strange vests. What kind of vests? Explosive vests. Each human had enough explosives strapped to their body to destroy a small building. Parker saw the look on our faces when we realized what they were wearing. He smiled and said, "You on our base? Come and take it." Zethkar's hands started shaking again. The battle for the command center lasted 2 hours. The humans didn't try to win. They tried to kill as many of us as possible before they died. When a human soldier was about to be captured, they would activate their vest. When they ran out of ammunition, they would activate their vest. When they were wounded too badly to fight, they would activate their vest. That's... Velith struggled to find words. Insane? Yes, but also effective. We lost 400 soldiers taking that one room, 400 of our best fighters. Parker killed 60 of them himself before we finally shot him down. Zethkar looked directly at Velith. But Parker wasn't finished. Even dying, he had one more surprise for us. What was that? As he fell, he pressed a button on his command console. A countdown started on all the screens in the room. 10 minutes. Parker had rigged the entire base to explode. Everything. The power core. The weapon stores. The fuel tanks. All of it. Did you escape? Barely. We had 10 minutes to get every soldier off the base and back to our ships. We ran through corridors filled with bodies. Human bodies and our bodies. The whole base was like a graveyard. Zethkar took another drink. We made it to our ships with 30 seconds to spare. Then we watched from space as Luna Base disappeared in a ball of fire. Parker had destroyed his own base rather than let us have it. But you had won. You had taken the base, had we? We lost 1,500 soldiers. Almost half our assault force. And what did we get? Nothing. A pile of burning metal floating in space. Parker had made sure that even if we won, we lost. Zethkar stood up again. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened afterward. What do you mean? Remember, Parker had broadcast the whole battle to Earth. Every human on the planet watched Luna Base fight and die. They watched Parker and his soldiers choose death over surrender. And instead of being afraid, they were inspired. Zethkar started walking toward the door. After Luna Base, every human military unit started fighting the same way. No surrender. No retreat. No prisoners. They would rather die than let us win. He stopped at the door and looked back. Come back tomorrow. I'll tell you about Chicago. About Major Alex Turner and the Underground War. About what happens when an entire city decides to fight like Parker did. As Zethkar left, Velith realized his hands were shaking too. He looked at the recording device. 3 days of stories, and each one was worse than the last. He was starting to understand why the hegemony had retreated from Earth. The humans hadn't just been fighting for their planet. They had been fighting for the right to choose how they lived and how they died, and that Velith was beginning to realize made them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. On the 4th day, Velith found Zethkar already drunk. The alien veteran had 3 empty glasses in front of him and was working on a 4th. His 4 hands moved constantly, making small nervous gestures. Chicago, Zethkar said before Velith could even sit down. You want to know about Chicago? Velith set up his recording device carefully. Zethkar seemed more agitated today, more unstable. The journalist wondered if these stories were as hard to tell as they were to hear. After Luna Base, the fleet commanders were angry. We had lost thousands of soldiers and gained nothing. They decided to try a different approach. Instead of attacking military targets, they would take control of human cities and force the government to surrender. That sounds reasonable. It would have been reasonable if we were fighting reasonable people, but the humans had stopped being reasonable. They had become something else. Something worse. Zethkar took another drink. His movements were getting sloppy, but his voice was still clear. Chicago was a big human city. Millions of people. Tall buildings. Important businesses. The commanders thought that if we could take and hold Chicago, the human government would have to negotiate. What went wrong? Major Alex Turner went wrong. The way Zethkar said the name made Velith's skin crawl. It was the same tone he had used for Morrison and Brooks and Parker, but with something extra. Something that sounded like fear mixed with respect. Turner was different from the others. Morrison was a professional soldier. Brooks was a teacher who became a fighter. Parker was a military commander. But Turner was something new. He was a human who had been created by war. What do you mean? Turner had been fighting us for 8 months when we reached Chicago. He had survived New Denver. He had escaped from Luna Base just before Parker destroyed it. He had learned from every battle, every defeat, every victory. The war had turned him into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Zethkar stood up unsteadily and walked to the window. Outside, ships moved between the stars like distant lights. When we arrived at Chicago, the city looked normal from space. People in the streets. Vehicles moving around. Lights in the buildings. The commanders thought the humans hadn't had time to prepare. Had they? They had been preparing for months. Turner had convinced the city government to let him turn Chicago into a fortress. But not the kind of fortress we expected. Zethkar came back to the table and sat down. He seemed to be having trouble focusing on Velith's face. We landed with 5,000 soldiers. Our biggest ground force yet. The plan was simple. Surround the city, move in from all sides, take control of the government buildings and force the leaders to surrender. What happened when you entered the city? Nothing. For the first day, nothing at all. We marched through empty streets. We set up checkpoints. We occupied government buildings. The humans seemed to have just disappeared. Zethkar laughed, but it was a broken sound. We thought we had finally learned how to fight them. We thought they had finally learned to be afraid of us. We were so wrong. Where were the humans? Underground. Turner had moved the entire population into subway tunnels, basement networks, and sewers. Miles and miles of tunnels under the city. But they weren't hiding. They were hunting. Zethkar's voice got quieter but also more intense. The attack started on the 2nd day, Small groups of humans would come up from manholes and storm drains. They would attack our patrols and then disappear again before we could respond. How many humans were fighting? Everyone. Turner had turned every citizen into a soldier. Men, women, old people, young people, even children. They all had weapons. They all knew how to use them. They all knew the tunnel systems. Velith felt sick. Children? Children as young as 10 years old. Turner used them as scouts and messengers. They could move through the tunnels faster than adults. They were harder to catch, and they were just as willing to die as the grown-ups. Zethkar finished his drink and immediately asked for another. The bartender looked concerned but brought it anyway. The worst part wasn't the attacks. It was never knowing when they would come. We would be walking down a street and suddenly humans would pour out of every building, every alley, every doorway. They would fight for a few minutes, kill as many of us as they could, then vanish back underground. How did you try to stop them? We tried everything. We sealed manholes and storm drains, but there were thousands of them. We sent soldiers into the tunnels, but they never came back. We used gas weapons to try to flush them out, but the tunnel systems were too big and too well ventilated. Zethkar's hands were shaking worse now. Turner had thought of everything. The humans had food stored underground. They had medical supplies. They had workshops where they made weapons and explosives. The tunnels weren't just hiding places. They were a whole underground city. How long did you try to hold Chicago? 2 months. 2 months of being hunted like animals in our own occupied city. We controlled the surface during the day, but at night the humans owned everything. They would sneak into our bases and leave bombs. They would poison our water supplies. They would attack our supply convoys. Zethkar looked directly at Velith with bloodshot eyes. Do you know what it's like to never feel safe? To know that every step you take might be your last? To sleep with one eye open because you know the humans are always watching, always waiting. It sounds terrible. It was worse than terrible. It was designed to drive us insane. Turner understood something about warfare that we didn't. He knew that killing our bodies wasn't enough. He wanted to kill our minds too. Zethkar took another drink. The humans started using psychological warfare. They would leave recordings playing in empty buildings, sounds of humans laughing, or crying or screaming. They would leave messages written on walls in our language telling us we were going to die. How did they learn your language? They captured some of our soldiers and made them teach it. But Turner didn't just want to communicate with us. He wanted to get inside our heads. He wanted us to know that he understood us better than we understood ourselves. Velith was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, did you ever see Turner yourself? Once, near the end. My unit was trying to clear a subway station. We thought it was empty. Then Turner appeared out of the shadows with a dozen other humans. He looked at us for a long moment like he was deciding whether we were worth killing. What did he look like? Like death. Like a human who had forgotten how to be human. His eyes were empty. His face was covered in scars. His clothes were dirty and torn, but his weapons were clean and ready. Zethkar's voice got very quiet. Turner looked at me and smiled. Then he said something in perfect hegemony language. He said, welcome to hell. Population, you. What happened then? Nothing. He turned around and walked away. His people followed him. They just left us standing there. That was when I realized that Turner wasn't trying to win battles anymore. He was trying to break our spirits. He wanted us to know that we could never truly control his city. Zethkar stood up again, swaying slightly. We evacuated Chicago 2 days later. 5,000 soldiers went in. 3,000 came out. But the ones who survived were never the same. They had nightmares. They jumped at shadows. They couldn't sleep in dark places. What happened to Turner? He disappeared back into his tunnels. But his methods spread to other human cities. Soon, every major population center on Earth was fighting the same way. Underground, invisible, unstoppable. Zethkar started walking toward the door, but this time he was moving more slowly like an old man. Come back tomorrow, he said without turning around. I'll tell you about the end. About General Kate Sullivan and how the humans finally drove us away from their world. As he reached the door, he stopped and looked back. Turner taught us something important. He taught us that humans don't just fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemies never want to fight them again. Velith sat alone with the recording device, trying to process what he had heard. 4 days of stories, and each one revealed something more disturbing about human nature. Tomorrow would be the last day. He hoped he was strong enough to hear how this terrible war had ended. On the 5th day, Zethkar looked different. He was sober, clean, and sitting up straight. His 4 hands were steady on the table. For the first time since the interviews began, he looked like a soldier instead of a broken veteran. "Today is the last day," he said as Velith sat down. "Today I tell you why we really left Earth." Velith turned on the recording device. "I thought you left because the war was too costly. That's what we told ourselves. That's what we put in the official reports. But the real reason was much worse." Zethkar paused and looked around the cantina. It was quieter today with fewer customers. The alien veteran seemed to be choosing his words carefully. After Chicago, the fleet commanders knew we couldn't win by occupying human cities. The humans were too good at urban warfare, too willing to sacrifice everything to resist us, so they decided on a final strategy. What was that? Total war. Destroy human military capabilities completely. Force them to surrender by eliminating their ability to fight back. Zethkar's voice was calm and professional now, like he was giving a military briefing. The target was the Human Space Defense Network. Satellites, space stations, orbital weapons platforms. If we could destroy their ability to fight in space, they would be trapped on their planet. That sounds logical. It was logical. It was also our biggest mistake, because the humans had been preparing for exactly that kind of attack. Zethkar stood up and walked to the window, but this time his movements were controlled and deliberate. The human commander was General Kate Sullivan. She was in charge of all Earth space forces. Sullivan was different from Morrison and Brooks and Parker and Turner. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a planner, a strategist, someone who thought 10 steps ahead. How was she different? The others reacted to our attacks. They defended. They made us pay for every victory, but they were still responding to what we did. Sullivan was proactive. She was planning to attack us. Zethkar came back to the table and sat down. Sullivan had been studying our technology since the first day of the invasion. Every piece of equipment we lost, every weapon we left behind, every ship we abandoned. The humans collected it all and took it apart. To understand how it worked, to understand how to make it better. Velith felt a chill run down his spine. Better? Sullivan had teams of human scientists working around the clock. They didn't just want to copy our technology. They wanted to improve it. Make it faster. Make it stronger. Make it deadlier. Zethkar's voice got quieter, but it was still steady. While we were fighting in Chicago and other cities, losing thousands of soldiers, Sullivan was building a secret fleet. Ships that looked like human designs but used our technology. Weapons that were based on our plasma rifles but hit twice as hard. How is that possible? Your technology was centuries ahead of theirs. That's what we thought. But human brains work differently than ours. They see connections that we miss. They think of solutions that we would never consider. They take our perfect designs and make them better by making them imperfect. Zethkar leaned forward. Do you understand what I'm saying? The humans took our advanced technology and improved it using their primitive knowledge. They made our weapons more powerful by making them less sophisticated. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to us. But it works. Human engineering is chaotic, unpredictable, and completely effective. Zethkar stood up again and began pacing slowly around the table. The final battle happened near their moon. Sullivan brought her secret fleet out of hiding. 50 human ships against 200 of ours. We should have destroyed them easily, but you didn't. We couldn't even touch them. The human ships moved like nothing we had ever seen. They were faster than our fastest fighters, more maneuverable than our scout ships, and their weapons cut through our armor like it was made of paper. Zethkar stopped pacing and looked directly at Velith. In 30 minutes of fighting, Sullivan's fleet destroyed 60 of our ships, 60 of our best warships. We had never lost so many ships so quickly. How? The human pilots were different too. They flew like Turner fought, like Parker defended, like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. But more than that, they flew like they understood our ships better than we did. Zethkar sat back down. The pilot who nearly killed me was named Marie Johnson, a lieutenant commander. She flew a modified human fighter that shouldn't have been able to match our interceptors. But she didn't just match them. She destroyed them. What made her so dangerous? She thought like a human but fought like a machine. She made decisions too fast for our computers to track. She took risks that no sane pilot would take. And somehow those risks always paid off. Zethkar's hands moved restlessly on the table. Johnson chased my ship through an asteroid field. She flew through spaces that were too narrow for her fighter. She made turns that should have killed her. She shot at me from angles that should have been impossible. How did you survive? I didn't deserve to. Johnson had me dead to rights 3 different times. But each time, instead of killing me, she disabled part of my ship. My weapons. My engines. My communications. She was playing with me. Zethkar looked down at his hands. At the end, when my ship was drifting helpless, Johnson pulled up next to me, close enough that I could see her face through her helmet. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she spoke on an open channel. What did she say? She said, "Tell your people that this is what we do to anyone who threatens our home. Tell them that we're coming for them next." Then she flew away. Velith was quiet for a moment. Coming for them? That's when we realized the truth. The humans weren't just defending their planet anymore. They were preparing to invade ours. Zethkar's voice got very quiet. After the battle, our intelligence teams analyzed the wreckage of the human ships. What they found changed everything. What did they find? Faster than light drives. The humans had not only improved our technology, they had solved problems that we had been working on for centuries. They had created ships that could travel between stars faster than ours. That's impossible. They had just learned to leave their planet. That's what we thought. But the humans had been preparing for space travel for generations. Not with technology, but with imagination. They had written stories about traveling to other worlds. They had dreamed about meeting alien species. They had planned for interstellar war before they even knew that other species existed. Zethkar stood up one final time. The fleet commanders realized that we weren't fighting a primitive species anymore. We were fighting a species that was about to become our equal, or worse, our superior, so you retreated. We ran. Like cowards. The mighty hegemony fleet ran away from a species that had only had space travel for a few years. Zethkar walked toward the door, but this time he moved with purpose. The official report said we withdrew because the invasion was too costly. But the real reason was fear. Fear that if we stayed any longer, the humans would start hunting us across the galaxy. Was that fear justified? Zethkar stopped at the door and looked back. 2 years after we left Earth, our long-range sensors detected human ships leaving their solar system. Exploration vessels at first, then military patrols. Now, 20 years later, there are human colonies in 6 different star systems. Are they hostile? Not yet. But they're expanding faster than any species in recorded history. And every human ship we've detected carries weapons based on our technology. Weapons that are better than ours. Zethkar opened the door and stepped halfway through it. You asked me why I decided to tell these stories now. It's because the galaxy needs to understand what humans really are. What are they? They're not just another intelligent species. They're not just another spacefaring civilization. They're something new. Something that has never existed before. Zethkar's voice carried clearly across the cantina. Humans are a species that has been preparing for war since the day they learned to think. Every story they tell, every game they play, every dream they have is about conflict and survival. They don't just fight to win, they fight to evolve. What do you think will happen? I think the galaxy is about to change in ways we can't imagine. I think humans are going to spread across the stars whether we want them to or not. And I think any species that tries to stop them will learn the same lessons we learned. Zethkar stepped completely through the door, then looked back one last time. The humans have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We tried to kill them, and we failed. Now they're stronger than ever, and they're coming. As the door closed behind him, Velith sat alone with the recording device. 5 days of stories, 5 days of revelation. He finally understood why Zethkar had looked so old and tired. The alien veteran wasn't just haunted by the war he had fought. He was terrified of the war that was coming. Velith turned off the recording device and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were moving between worlds, carrying weapons and dreams and an endless hunger for new frontiers. The galaxy would never be the same.